Welcome to our nocturnal laboratory of gentle discoveries. Here at Dreamtime Science, we transform complex concepts into lullabies for the curious mind. You know what's fascinating? The way something as simple as bread can teach us so much about time and patience. I've been thinking about how every little moment in baking, from mixing to rising, shapes the final loaf in ways we might never notice. Tonight, I'd love to share why timing in bread baking is like a quiet dance that brings warmth and magic right to our tables. If these gentle explorations bring you comfort, a quiet like or subscription would mean the world to me. Your support helps keep these peaceful journeys flowing. Now, take a moment. Adjust your blanket. Find the perfect hollow in your pillow. Let your shoulders melt. Breathe in and out. In the hush of twilight, as the last rays of the sun glint through kitchen windows, there is a quiet ritual that unfolds in homes across the world, one that connects us with centuries of ancestors and perhaps a touch of something magical. A handful of flour, a cup of water, a pinch of salt, and most mysterious of all, a scattering of yeast. These are the humble beginnings of bread, the staff of life, the food that has sustained civilizations and inspired poets. But what is it really that animates this mixture, coaxing it from mere paste to pillowy dough and then to fragrant golden loaves? Tonight, as the city outside settles into gentle darkness, let us draw back the veil on this everyday alchemy and discover the profound story that begins with yeast and unfolds through the patient passage of time. Yeast. Even the word feels ancient and soft, as if dusted with flour. In the world of science, yeast is classified as a fungus, a domain of life that sits quietly apart from both plants and animals, yet shares something with each. The yeast most beloved by bakers is Saccharomyces cerevisiae, a single-celled organism that has accompanied humanity for thousands of years. Invisible to the naked eye, it is nevertheless a restless and dynamic presence. If you could shrink yourself down to its scale, you might see a bustling community of cells, each shaped like a tiny oval balloon, glistening with life. These cells are not inert. They are alive, brimming with the urge to grow, to divide, and most crucially, to eat. And what is the favorite food of yeast? Sugar. To yeast, the carbohydrates nestled within flour are as enticing as a banquet in a fairy tale. When water is poured over flour, it does more than simply wet the grains. It awakens the yeast, which might have been dormant, suspended in a dry slumber, waiting for the right conditions. The water seeps into the cell walls, stirring the yeast to life. Suddenly, the kitchen, quiet and ordinary, becomes the stage for an invisible drama. The yeast begins to feast. Here, in this microscopic world, the yeast cells encounter the sugars, some already present in the flour, others produced as enzymes break down complex starches. The cells begin to metabolize, a process called fermentation. It is a word that conjures images of slow, bubbling transformations, and rightly so. As the yeast consumes the sugars, it produces two main byproducts, carbon dioxide and alcohol. But these are no mere waste products. The carbon dioxide, trapped within the stretchy web of gluten proteins that also form when flour and water combine, creates bubbles throughout the dough. Each bubble is like a tiny airship, lifting the dough, making it rise, transforming it from a dense, sticky mass into something light and almost living. The alcohol, meanwhile, infuses the dough with subtle flavors, some of which will evaporate during baking, others that will linger as the bread cools. It is, in its essence, a kind of spell. The transformation is so dramatic, so complete, that one might be forgiven for thinking of magic, or of the science fiction marvels that populate our collective imagination. In the universe of Star Trek, there is the replicator, a device that, with a hum and a shimmer, produces food out of pure energy and rearranged matter. Bread, hot and fragrant, appears at the touch of a button. The fantasy is seductive. food conjured from nothing, instant and perfect. Yet in our own kitchens the process is slower, more intimate, and perhaps more wondrous. For what is yeast if not a living replicator of a kind? It takes the raw materials of the world, flour, water, and through the patient work of hours turns them into something entirely new. It multiplies, it transforms, it creates where there was nothing but potential. Each loaf of bread is a small act of creation, a testament to the quiet power of time and life. Consider for a moment the patience required by bread in a world where so much is instant, information, communication, entertainment. Bread remains stubbornly beholden to the clock. The baker mixes, kneads, and then waits. The dough rises, slowly at first, then more quickly as the yeast grows bolder and more numerous. There is a wisdom in this slowness. The yeast, like an artisan, crafts not only the texture but the flavor of the bread, developing complex notes that cannot be rushed. This partnership between yeast and time is ancient, and it is sacred in its way. Archaeologists have found evidence of leavened bread in Egyptian tombs over 4,000 years old. The bread was so valued that it was placed alongside pharaohs for their journey to the afterlife. In the Old Testament, bread appears as both sustenance and symbol, manna from heaven, and the unleavened bread of haste and escape. In every culture where wheat or other cereals could be grown, bread has emerged as a staple, a symbol, a ritual. Travel through time and across continents, and you find bread at the heart of human gatherings. In France, the daily baguette is a matter of national pride, its crisp crust and tender crumb the result of careful fermentation and artisanal skill. In Ethiopia, injera, spongy and sour, made from teff flour, serves as both plate and utensil, a communal experience that binds families and friends. In India, there is naan and chapati, each with its own tradition of leavening and baking, fragrant with the warmth of the tandoor or the sizzle of the griddle. Yet despite these differences, the underlying process is the same, the magic of yeast and time. It is a process that transcends borders and languages, a common thread woven through our shared humanity. In every loaf there is the echo of ancient hands, the wisdom of generations, the quiet miracle of life transforming life. The cultural importance of bread cannot be overstated. It is food, yes, but also metaphor. Breaking bread is an act of peace, of hospitality, of kinship. To share bread is to share more than calories. It is to participate in a tradition as old as civilization itself. The word companion, after all, comes from the Latin com panis, one who shares bread. Bread has inspired stories, art, and song. In many societies, the act of baking is surrounded by ritual and superstition. In rural Europe, it was once common to mark the dough with a cross before baking, a blessing and a plea for the bread to rise well. In Jewish tradition, the challah loaf is braided and blessed, a centerpiece of the Sabbath meal. In Mexico, the pan de muerto is decorated with bone-shaped ornaments for the Day of the Dead, linking bread to memory and mourning. Even the failures of bread, the collapsed loaf, the dense crumb, the stubbornly unrisen dough, have their own stories and lessons. They remind us that this is not a process entirely under our control. The yeast has its own needs, its own pace. It is a living partner, not a machine. The baker learns patience, humility, and, with time, a kind of reverence for the forces that shape the dough. The scent of bread as it bakes is more than appetizing. It is evocative, primal. It speaks of home, of nourishment, of safety. Scientists have studied the aroma compounds released during baking, finding that they trigger deep-seated memories and emotions. There is a universality to this experience, a loaf of bread cooling on a windowsill, its crust crackling softly as it settles. All of this, the science, the story, the symbol, begins with yeast. The smallest of creatures, working in their countless millions, transform our world. With every loaf they remind us of the power of cooperation, of the beauty in waiting, of the magic that can arise from the most ordinary of ingredients. There is a peculiar joy in knowing the science behind the magic, even as the magic persists. To understand that yeast is a living cell, equipped with its own machinery for breaking down sugars, producing energy, and dividing into daughter cells, does not diminish the wonder. If anything, it deepens it. The cytoplasm of a yeast cell is a bustling workshop, filled with enzymes and genetic instructions, all working together in perfect synchrony. The carbon dioxide bubbles that lift the dough are the breath of life, the signature of a process that links us to the dawn of agriculture and beyond. In the quiet of the night, as the dough rises on the counter, there is time to reflect on the improbable journey that brought yeast to our kitchens. It is believed that the first breads were likely the result of happy accidents, wild yeasts settling onto a mixture of flour and water left out in the open, transforming it overnight. The early bakers, perhaps, regarded this with awe or suspicion, but over time they learned to cultivate and tame the yeast, to save a piece of dough from one batch to start the next. In this way, the tradition was passed down, a living legacy carried forward with each generation. Today, we can buy yeast in neat packets, measured and reliable, but the essence remains unchanged. We are still participants in a dance that spans millennia, still reliant on the unseen labors of these tiny fungi. The time-honored methods, sourdough starters passed down from parent to child, the slow fermentation of rustic loaves, are a link to the past and a promise for the future. As we contemplate this process, we might begin to see bread not just as food, but as a microcosm of life itself. The need for patience, the importance of balance, the humility before forces greater than ourselves, all are lessons needed into the dough. The yeast, unseen and tireless, becomes a symbol of hope and renewal, of the ways in which small things given time can change the world. And so, in kitchens illuminated by the soft glow of lamplight, the ancient partnership continues. The dough rests and rises, the yeast works its quiet transformation, and the promise of bread fills the air. There is comfort in the slowness, in the waiting, in the knowledge that some things cannot be hurried. Beyond the walls of the kitchen, the world may rush and clamour, but here time moves differently. The yeast, unhurried and unyielding, reminds us to slow down, to savour, to trust in the quiet miracles that unfold in their own time. The transformation is not yet complete. The story of bread has only just begun. In the lingering warmth of the evening, as the dough rises and the air grows fragrant with possibility, we await the next chapter in this ancient, ongoing tale. Beneath the surface of flour and water, long before a loaf emerges golden and fragrant from the oven, there unfolds a sequence of transformations as old as agriculture itself and as subtle as the weather. Bread is born not only from the hands of the baker, but from the invisible choreography of molecules, as chemistry and physics entwine in a partnership both delicate and robust. The bowl in which dough is mixed becomes for a time a microcosm where matter rearranges itself, each step both orderly and chaotic, a paradox that is the very heart of the craft. Let us begin with the simplest of ingredients, wheat flour and water. To the untrained eye these may seem inert, lifeless, but when wetted, flour, milled from the ripened seeds of grass, releases its latent potential. Grains of wheat, ground to a fine powder, contain two families of proteins, gluten and gliadin. Alone they are discrete, each with its own quirks of structure and behavior. But add water, and these proteins awaken. Their structures unfurl, their ends seek one another, and bonds form, reversible at first, then strengthening with time and motion. It is here in the act of kneading that the breadmaker's hands become agents of transformation. With each fold, stretch and press, the gluten and gliadin proteins form bridges, creating a viscoelastic network known as gluten. This network is neither rigid nor loose, but possesses the rare quality of being both extensible and resilient. The dough yields to pressure, then springs back, capturing and holding pockets of air. What emerges is something more than the sum of its parts, a living matrix capable of both expansion and containment. There is a peculiar satisfaction in the tactile experience of kneading, the way dough resists, then softens, almost as if it were a living thing. Yet despite centuries of tradition, the science behind gluten formation is only now being fully appreciated. The gluten network aligns itself in response to mechanical energy, its strands stretching and cross-linking, the balance between elasticity and extensibility guided by the baker's technique, the type of flour, the temperature, the amount of water. Here, precision meets intuition. Too little water and the dough is dry, inelastic. Too much and it becomes slack, unable to hold its shape. The ideal lies somewhere in between, a place found not merely by measurement, but by feel, by experience. Within this matrix, another transformation begins, one just as vital and even more mysterious. Yeast, whether wild strains captured from the air or cultivated Saccharomyces cerevisiae, feeds upon the starches broken down from flour, excreting carbon dioxide and ethanol. The gas, trapped by the gluten network, gathers in bubbles, causing the dough to rise. The process is slow, almost meditative. It cannot be hurried. The baker waits as the dough swells, the surface smoothing, the scent shifting from raw flour to something richer, more complex. This phase, known as fermentation, is more than mere leavening. The yeast, and in some traditional breads, lactic acid bacteria, produce not just gas, but a host of flavor compounds, alcohols, acids, esters, that deepen the complexity of the finished loaf. The pH of the dough drops, subtly altering the behavior of the gluten, tightening it, making it more robust. Time itself is an ingredient here, measured not only in hours, but in the slow accumulation of flavor. A quick bread, hurried through this stage, may rise, but it will lack the depth, the character of one that has lingered in fermentation's embrace. And so, as the dough rises, there is interplay between structure and air, between flavor and texture, between the intentions of the baker and the whims of the living organisms within the dough. There is a myth, persistent and alluring, that baking is an exact science, that every variable must be controlled, every measurement precise. Yet the truth is more nuanced, more forgiving. The best bakers know when to let go, to trust their senses, the feel of the dough beneath their palms, the scent that wafts from the bowl, the way the surface springs back when pressed. They know that flour changes with the seasons, that humidity shifts the balance, that even the mood of the day can find its way into the bread. Science offers principles, but art fills the spaces between. The dough, once risen, must be shaped, a final act of preparation before the heat of the oven. Here, surface tension matters. Shaping stretches the gluten at the surface, creating a taut skin that will help the loaf rise upward, not outward, as it bakes. The act is gentle, deliberate, coaxing the dough into its final form. The shaped loaf may rest again in a stage known as proofing, as the yeast completes its work and the gluten relaxes just enough to allow for the final expansion. Then comes the transformation, most dramatic: baking. The oven, preheated and waiting, is a crucible. Here, physics and chemistry accelerate, the pace quickens, and the dough's fate is sealed. As the loaf enters the heat, the water within the dough begins to vaporize, steam inflating the bubbles that were formed during fermentation. This is oven spring, a rapid expansion that gives bread its volume and airiness. The gluten network, now at its limits, sets in place as the proteins coagulate and the starches gelatinize, fixing the structure of the crumb. In these first minutes of baking, the loaf is vulnerable. Too little heat, and it will collapse. Too much, and it will harden before it can rise. The baker's oven becomes an instrument of both destruction and creation, its temperature a fulcrum upon which success teeters. Here again, intuition matters. the placement of the loaf, the introduction of steam to keep the crust supple during expansion, the timing of each step, and then, as the loaf approaches its final form, a new alchemy unfolds at the surface. The Maillard reaction, named for the French chemist Louis-Camille Maillard, is a symphony of browning, a dance between amino acids and reducing sugars that yields the golden crust, the aroma of toast and caramel, the subtle bitterness that balances the bread's sweetness. The Maillard reaction is not mere burning. It is a complex web of reactions, producing hundreds of flavor compounds, each contributing to the sensory experience of bread. The color deepens, the scent intensifies, the crust shatters beneath the knife, offering a contrast to the tender crumb within. This browning is not inevitable, nor is it always uniform. The baker may choose to enhance it, brushing the surface with milk or egg, or may seek a paler, softer crust for certain styles of bread. The Maillard reaction is sensitive to temperature, to moisture, to the concentration of sugars and proteins at the surface. In some breads, a thin layer of flour is dusted atop, arresting the browning and creating a rustic appearance. In others, the oven's heat is increased at the end to achieve a dark, crackling finish. Yet even here, in the apparent precision of chemistry, there is room for variation, for error, for discovery. The Maillard reaction can be coaxed or subdued, its products shaped by the baker's choices. There is no single way, no perfect formula. Each loaf bears the imprint of its making, the choices rendered in heat and time and touch. Consider, too, the myth of the recipe as a strict set of instructions, a blueprint to be followed without deviation. In truth, a recipe is but a starting point, a map rather than a decree. The flour in your kitchen, the water from your tap, the air that drifts through your window, these all differ, subtly but surely, from those in any other place. The baker adapts, responds, corrects. A dough that is too stiff may be loosened with a splash of water. One that is too slack may be firmed with a dusting of flour. The timing of fermentation may shift with the seasons, the heat of summer hastening the process, the chill of winter slowing it. Even the hands that knead the dough are unique, imparting their own rhythm, their own energy. The science of baking is a scaffold, a set of principles upon which creativity can flourish. It is the difference between painting by numbers and painting by feel. The rules guide, but do not constrain. The baker is free to experiment, to fail, to learn, to innovate. The sourdough baker, cultivating wild yeast and bacteria, must learn to read the signs of life in the culture, to sense when it is ready, to adapt to its whims. The maker of enriched breads, with eggs and butter and sugar, must balance richness with structure, ensuring that the dough remains supple but strong. Each bread is a negotiation, a conversation between ingredients, environment, and intention. Even the act of scoring the loaf, slashing the surface with a sharp blade before baking, is both practical and expressive. The cuts allow steam to escape, guiding the expansion of the loaf and preventing rupture. But they also serve as signatures, patterns etched in dough, marks of identity. A single deep cut yields a bold opening. A series of shallow slashes creates a delicate pattern. The baker, in this moment, leaves a mark that endures in the finished bread, visible evidence of the hand that shaped it. As the loaf bakes, time slows. The kitchen fills with aroma, the scent of transformation, grain to dough, dough to bread. The crust crackles, the crumb sets, the loaf takes on its final form. The process is both ancient and new, each loaf a unique expression of chemistry, physics, and artistry. Yet for all its apparent complexity, bread remains accessible, forgiving. A loaf may fail to rise, may burn or crack or dry out, yet the lessons endure. The baker learns, adapts, tries again. There is comfort in the rhythm, in the repetition, in the gradual accrual of skill. Bread making is not a test to be passed, but a practice, a journey. The science serves the art, and the art in turn deepens the science. Outside the oven, the world continues its own rhythms. The seasons turn, grains are sown and harvested, hands knead and shape, ovens warm and cool. The cycle repeats, each iteration both familiar and surprising. The bread that emerges is more than food. It is a testament to the interplay of order and chaos, to the power of transformation, to the quiet intelligence of those who work with their senses open and their minds attuned to the mysteries of matter. In the glow of the cooling loaf, as the crust sings with faint cracks, the journey is not yet complete. There remains the moment of rest, the anticipation, the final revelation of crumb and flavor. There is, too, a deeper story, a connection between the bread of today and that of centuries past, between the science of molecules and the art of the hand. The dance of chemistry and physics is ongoing, an endless conversation whispered in flour and water, yeast and heat. Tomorrow, perhaps, a new loaf will be begun, shaped by the lessons of the last, guided by both memory and curiosity. The science will remain, the physics unchanging, but the art will evolve, each loaf a new answer to old questions. And so, as the night deepens and the kitchen quiets, the dance continues, unfolding, unfinished, always beckoning onward. In the gentle, dim-lit hush of an early morning bakery, before the city stirs, a baker's hands move with the practiced certainty of a conductor guiding the first notes of a symphony. Flour dust dances in the shafts of light, every motion deliberate yet almost meditative. This is the realm of dough, and of time, and of transformation, a place where the ancient rhythms of human ingenuity and natural chemistry converge. Here, bread is not merely food, it is the outcome of careful observation, of experiments repeated over centuries, and of a dialogue between humans and the invisible world of microbes and molecules. Let us slip quietly into this world, tracing the story of bread from its primordial beginnings to the measured precision of today's baking science. As we do, we'll see how clocks and calendars, our inventions for measuring the passage of time, are as vital in the bakery as they are in the laboratory, shaping the rise of dough as surely as the earth's own turning shapes the tides. Bread's story is as old as civilization. Long before written records, our distant ancestors discovered that the simple combination of flour and water, when left to its own devices, would bubble and grow, becoming something wondrously new. Perhaps it began as an accident. A bowl of porridge left out too long, warmed by the sun, enlivened by wild yeasts in the air. The transformation from gruel to leavened bread must have seemed miraculous, a living thing, rising of its own accord, filled with air, tender and fragrant after baking. In those days, there were no recipes, no thermometers or timers. Everything was guided by the senses, the feel of the dough beneath the hands, the changing smell as it fermented, the subtle shift in appearance when it was ready for the fire. Bread was made with a living starter, a culture of wild yeast and bacteria, carefully nurtured and handed down through generations. A tangible link to the past, a continuity of life and sustenance. These ancient bakers were proto-scientists, their experiments guided by curiosity and necessity. They observed, adjusted, and learned, refining their craft with each passing season. As societies advanced, so too did their breads. In the cool, stone-walled bakeries of Egypt and Mesopotamia, records on papyrus and clay tablets chronicled the secrets of bread-making, the types of grain to use, the methods for grinding and mixing, the timing of fermentation and baking. In ancient Greece and Rome, public bakeries flourished, and bread became a staple of daily life, baked in communal ovens that glowed with the heat of shared endeavor. The Roman poet Juvenal famously declared that the people were content with bread and circuses, a testament to the centrality of bread in sustaining both body and society. But even as bread became more ubiquitous, the process remained shrouded in mystery. Why did some loaves rise higher than others? Why did bread sometimes collapse or emerge dense and heavy? The answers lay hidden in the invisible world of microbes and enzymes, in the slow chemistry of fermentation, a world that would not be fully revealed until centuries later, when the tools of science and the discipline of careful measurement transformed baking from art to artful science. Step into a modern bakery and you will find echoes of these ancient mysteries alongside the precision of the laboratory. The air hums with the sounds of mixers and timers, the clatter of scales and thermometers. Professional bakers have become both artisans and scientists, wielding tools and techniques that allow them to control the variables that once lay beyond their ancestors' reach. The first and most essential tool in the baker's arsenal is the scale. To the casual eye, a pinch of salt or a scoop of flour may seem sufficient. But in the world of bread, such imprecision can spell the difference between perfection and disappointment. Flour, water, salt, and yeast. Each must be weighed with care, their ratios calibrated to the gram. This is not mere fussiness, but a recognition of the delicate balance required for dough to develop properly. Too much water, and the dough becomes slack and sticky. Too little, and it remains stiff and unyielding. Salt restrains the growth of yeast, enhancing flavor, but also slowing fermentation. Even the temperature of the water matters, influencing the speed at which yeast and bacteria awaken and begin their feast. The thermometer is another quiet sentinel in the baker's toolkit, measuring the temperature of dough, water, and air. Temperature governs the pace of fermentation, dictating when the dough will be ready to shape, when it will reach its peak of rise, and when it will need to be baked. A few degrees can make all the difference. Too cold, and the yeast slumbers, leaving the dough flat and lifeless. Too warm, and it races ahead, exhausting itself before the bread has a chance to develop its full flavor. Bakers learn to read these subtle cues, adjusting their process to accommodate the fickle moods of weather and season. Yet even with all these tools, the baker's most vital instrument remains time itself, a resource to be managed with as much care as any ingredient. Bread is a living process, and its transformation unfolds over hours, sometimes days. The dough must be mixed and kneaded, allowed to rest and ferment, shaped, proofed, and finally baked. Each stage is governed by the clock, and by the baker's intuition, honed through experience and observation. Timing in bread is not a simple matter of setting a timer and waiting for the bell. The dough is alive, and its needs shift with the changing environment. A warm kitchen may hasten fermentation, while a cool one slows it down. The flour may be drier in winter, more humid in summer. Bakers learn to watch for signs. The feel of the dough as it stretches and springs back beneath the hand. The aroma that deepens as fermentation advances. The way the surface blisters with tiny bubbles. These are signals, clues to the state of the dough's internal world. The baker listens and responds, adapting the schedule as needed, guided by both the clock and the senses. In the quest to understand and perfect bread, scientists have joined bakers on this journey, bringing new tools and insights to the ancient craft. In laboratories, researchers study the microbiology of sourdough, isolating and identifying the myriad species of yeast and lactic acid bacteria that give each loaf its unique character. They measure the gases produced during fermentation, track the activity of enzymes that break down starches and proteins, and analyze the structure of gluten networks that trap air and create the bread's open crumb. One of the most transformative discoveries in baking science was the identification and cultivation of commercial baker's yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, in the 19th century. Before this, bakers relied on wild yeasts and sourdough cultures, each with its own quirks and unpredictabilities. With pure yeast, fermentation could be controlled and standardized, allowing for greater consistency and speed. The bread could be made lighter, airier, and more uniform. an advantage in the industrial bakeries that supplied growing cities. Yet even as science brought new efficiencies, it also revealed the complexity and subtlety of bread. The simple act of mixing flour and water sets off a cascade of biochemical reactions. Enzymes in the flour begin to break down starch into sugars, feeding the yeast, while gluten proteins align and bond, creating a stretchy network that can expand to hold the gases produced during fermentation. The dough is needed to strengthen this network, but not too much. Overworking the dough can make it tough. Underworking leaves it weak. Fermentation is the stage where time and microbial life perform their slow magic. As yeast consumes sugars, it produces carbon dioxide and ethanol, inflating the dough and infusing it with flavor. Lactic acid bacteria present in sourdough cultures contribute tang and complexity, breaking down additional components of the flour and releasing aromatic compounds. The length of fermentation, whether a few hours or overnight, shapes the final loaf, determining its texture, flavor, and keeping quality. The concept of the window pane test emerges here, a simple but telling experiment performed by bakers to gauge gluten development. A small piece of dough is stretched gently between the fingers. If it forms a thin, translucent membrane without tearing, the gluten network is well developed and ready for the next stage. This is a tactile, almost intimate way of reading the dough, a moment where human touch and scientific principle meet. As the dough ferments, it is punched down or folded, terms that belie the subtlety of the process. Folding the dough gently redistributes yeast and bacteria, equalizes temperature, and strengthens the gluten network, all without deflating the precious gases that have accumulated. Each fold is timed, each rest carefully measured. Finally comes the proof, the final rise before baking, a moment of anticipation. Here, timing is everything. Proof the dough too little, and it will not rise fully in the oven. Proof it too long, and it may collapse, spent and overextended. Bakers must watch, must feel, must judge when the dough is ready for the heat. Some test with a gentle poke. A slow return means the dough is proofed. A rapid spring back, and it needs more time. All the while, the clock ticks, but the dough does not obey the clock alone. It is a conversation between baker and bread, a negotiation shaped by experience, intuition, and a deep understanding of the forces at work. When the dough is finally ready, it is scored, slashed with a sharp blade to guide its expansion in the oven. This too is a blend of art and science. The depth and angle of the cuts direct the flow of steam and the opening of the loaf, creating the characteristic ear or crest of a well-baked bread. The loaf slides into the oven, where a final transformation takes place. Heat sets the structure, gelatinizes starch, and drives off water as steam, causing the bread to spring up, oven spring, before the crust forms and hardens. The maillard reaction, a complex series of chemical reactions between amino acids and reducing sugars, is responsible for the browning and flavor development of the crust. This is the moment when the aroma that fills the bakery reaches its peak, a heady mix of caramel, toast, and earth. The bread is nearly finished, but timing still matters. Baked too little, the crumb remains gummy. Too long, and it dries out, losing its tender bite. Throughout this journey, the baker's tools, scales, thermometers, timers, and tactile senses work in concert to guide the dough from raw ingredients to finished loaf. Yet even with all this knowledge, bread retains an element of unpredictability, a living quality that resists full control. Each batch is unique, shaped by the interplay of time, temperature, and touch. In recent years, a new wave of bakers and scientists has embraced the complexity of bread, seeking to rediscover old techniques and experiment with new ones. Sourdough, once the province of tradition-bound bakers, has become a subject of rigorous study. Researchers sequence the genomes of wild yeast and bacteria, mapping the microbial terroir of different regions. Bakers experiment with long, slow fermentations, alternative grains, and novel shaping methods, pushing the boundaries of what bread can be. Yet, for all the advances in technology and understanding, the heart of bread remains unchanged. It is a product of patience, of careful observation, and of respect for the living forces that shape it. The passage of time is both a constraint and a gift, allowing flavors to deepen, textures to develop, and the humble ingredients of flour, water, and salt to become something greater than the sum of their parts. As you listen and drift, imagine the slow, steady rhythms of the bakery at dawn, the mingled scent of flour and yeast, the quiet tick of the clock on the wall. The story of bread is not finished. It continues to unfold, shaped by the hands and minds of those who seek to perfect it. And always, always, it is guided by the subtle art of timing, the gentle negotiation between clocks, calendars, and dough. In the next stillness, as the oven doors swing open and the golden loaves emerge, there is a sense of anticipation of what might come next as science and tradition continue their age-old dance across the kitchen and laboratory alike. There is a moment almost sacred in its quietness when a loaf of bread emerges from the oven. The golden crust sings softly as it cools, whispering secrets in crackles and faint snaps. It is only bread, some might say, yet in the hush that follows, as the aroma swells and permeates the air, something more profound stirs. This humble transformation from flour and water and the invisible breath of yeast speaks to the very heart of human experience. Bread is not merely a foodstuff, but a metaphor, a symbol, a vessel of meaning as old as civilization itself. Why has bread, of all things, become so central to our story? Perhaps because in its making it mirrors the rhythms of life that shape us all: patience, change, uncertainty, hope. In the work of our hands, in the waiting, in the alchemy of ingredients transfigured, we find ourselves reflected back. The act of baking bread is as much an act of faith as it is a science. Consider the yeast, for instance, the tiny, nearly invisible organism that for thousands of years has been the silent architect behind the rise of the loaf. Yeast is a living mystery. Long before anyone could see it under a microscope, it was known by its effects: a bubbling, a swelling, a sweet perfume of fermentation. Ancient peoples called it the spirit of the dough, an apt phrase for something so intangible yet so vital. Even now, with all our knowledge, there is something wondrous about these single-celled fungi, how they feast upon sugars and exhale carbon dioxide, stretching and lifting the dough, coaxing it upward into airy lightness. To work with yeast is to enter into partnership with the unseen. It is an act of trust. The baker cannot force the rise, cannot command the process to hurry. Time must be given, the dough must be left to rest, to breathe, to grow in its own way. In this patience there is a lesson, a gentle insistence on the necessity of waiting, of allowing transformation to unfold at its own pace. The baker learns humility, the art of surrendering to forces larger and older than themselves. As the dough rises, a subtle drama plays out beneath the surface, a choreography of molecules, a quiet revolution. Gluten, that much maligned and misunderstood protein, weaves itself into long, elastic strands, forming a network that traps the gases released by yeast. Flour and water become more than their parts. The dough gains structure, resilience, life. Touch it, and you feel the springiness, the promise of something to come. Smell it, and there is a hint of sourness, a tang that speaks of fermentation and change. This is not only a chemical reaction, it is a metaphor for growth, for the unseen labor that precedes every harvest, every birth, every creative act. Bread remembers the hands that kneaded it, the air that fed its rise, the warmth that woke it from dormancy. In every loaf there is a story of time well spent, of patience rewarded. And then there is the shaping, the gentle folding, the tension drawn across the skin of the dough. To shape a loaf is to impart intention, to guide the formless toward form. Bakers speak of the window pane test, stretching a thin membrane of dough until it is almost translucent, a sign that the gluten network is strong and ready. Here again, in this delicacy, there is a lesson. Strength is not rigidity, but flexibility, resilience the ability to stretch without breaking. The oven, too, is a stage for transformation. Its heat is a paradox, both destroyer and creator. The loaf, so carefully nurtured, is thrust into its fiery chamber. In those first moments, the dough expands in a final burst of growth, what bakers call oven spring. The yeast, overwhelmed by the heat, dies, but not before leaving its mark, an airy, honeycombed interior, a crumb that yields beneath the knife. The crust forms, a protective shell that caramelizes and deepens in color, sealing in flavor and moisture. Maillard reactions, complex rearrangements of sugars and amino acids, create the aromas that fill the kitchen, that awaken hunger and memory alike. The loaf is transformed, not just in substance, but in meaning. It is no longer a mixture of ingredients, but something new, something whole. Yet all of this, the science, the skill, the waiting, would be incomplete without the final act, the sharing of bread. Across cultures and centuries, bread has been the food that binds us together, the centerpiece of meals both humble and grand. To break bread with another is to declare peace, to offer welcome, to recognize our shared need. There is poetry in this. The loaf is divided, yet it nourishes all who partake. In its giving there is abundance, in its sharing community. Bread, then, becomes a symbol of more than sustenance. It is a metaphor for generosity, for the interconnectedness of life. The loaf, shaped by many hands, by farmers, millers, bakers, and all who came before, is the sum of countless labors, the fruit of the earth and the work of human beings in concert with nature. The story of bread is also the story of adaptation, of resilience in the face of change. From the earliest flatbreads baked on hot stones to the complex sourdoughs of today, bread has evolved alongside us, shaped by climate and culture. Wheat in the north, millet and sorghum where the sun is fierce, rye in the cool, damp places. Each grain, each method tells of a people's relationship with the land, with the seasons, with the cycles of scarcity and plenty. In times of hardship, bread has been a symbol of hope, a promise that hunger will be answered. In festivals and rituals, it is a sign of celebration, of gratitude for harvest and home. Even in language, bread has shaped our metaphors. It is the staff of life, breaking bread, a phrase for friendship, earning one's bread, a shorthand for the daily work of living. There is something almost magical in how bread, so simple in its composition, can carry such weight. Its creation is rooted in biology and chemistry, yes, but its meaning is woven from the fabric of human longing. To bake bread is to participate in an ancient ritual, to join a lineage that stretches back to the first hands that ground grain and mixed it with water. Think of the baker rising before dawn, flour dusting their hands, the kitchen quiet, except for the soft sounds of dough being shaped. There is solitude here, but also connection, a sense that, in this act, one is part of something vast and enduring. The loaf that emerges from the oven will soon be eaten, its form vanishing, but the memory of its making lingers in the warmth of the hearth, the satisfaction of a meal shared. Even the imperfections of bread, the uneven crumb, the crack in the crust, the slightly scorched edge, are reminders that it is a living thing, the product of chance as much as design. Bread resists perfection. It is always a negotiation between the baker's intention and the unpredictable forces of nature. The humidity of the air, the strength of the flour, the vigor of the yeast, all conspire to create a loaf that is unique, unrepeatable. In this way, bread teaches acceptance. There will be failures, flat loaves, doughs that refuse to rise. Yet each attempt is a lesson, each mistake a step toward understanding. The baker learns to read the signs, the feel of the dough, the scent of fermentation, the sound of the crust cooling. Mastery, if it comes at all, is not a final achievement, but a lifelong conversation. This is why, in the end, bread is more than food. It is a metaphor for transformation, for the mystery of life unfolding. In its making, we see reflected the processes that shape all things: growth, decay, renewal. The grain that is milled into flour, the water absorbed, the yeast awakened, the fire that transforms, all echo the cycles of nature, the dance of matter and energy, the endless play of creation and destruction. Bread reminds us of our dependence on the earth, on the unseen labors that make our lives possible. Each loaf is a distillation of sun and rain, of soil and seed, of human ingenuity and care. In eating, we are joined to the world, to one another, to the long history of those who have come before. There is a quiet humility in this. The baker knows that much as they might strive for control, the process of bread making is always a collaboration with forces beyond their command. The yeast will rise or not, the dough will yield or resist, the loaf will be what it will be. In this surrender there is wisdom, a recognition of limits, an appreciation for the small miracles that happen when ingredients come together, when time and patience are given their due. Perhaps this is why bread occupies such a central place in our rituals and stories. It is the food of exile and homecoming, of scarcity and feast. It is offered in blessing, broken in mourning, shared in joy. In every culture, bread is more than sustenance. It is a symbol, a sacrament, a reminder that life itself is a gift, fragile and fleeting and precious. As night falls and the world grows quiet, there is comfort in the thought that somewhere a loaf is rising, a kitchen is filled with warmth, a table is being set. The work of the day is done, the labor of hands and time complete, and still the cycle continues, grain to flour, flour to dough, dough to bread, bread to table. In the softness of the crumb, in the crackle of the crust, in the aroma that lingers, there is a memory of beginnings. Bread carries with it the story of earth and sky, of seed and harvest, of human striving and surrender. It is a metaphor that endures, as timeless as the rising of the sun, as enduring as the turning of the seasons. And so, as you drift toward sleep, let the image linger, a loaf, warm and fragrant, resting on the table, the promise of nourishment, the evidence of transformation, the emblem of patience rewarded. In this bread the world is gathered, 1,000 stories, 1,000,000 hands, the quiet persistence of life itself. Somewhere, just beyond the reach of waking thought, yeast stirs in the dark, and the cycle begins anew. There is always another loaf to bake, another day to greet, another chance to shape the formless into form. The mystery persists, the metaphor deepens, and the story, our story, unfolds, one loaf at a time. As our journey through the warm, rising world of bread drifts to a close, we watch the golden crust glow like a comet tail fading into the hush of space. May this gentle rhythm of time and transformation lull you into peaceful contemplation until we meet again to explore more Dreamtime mysteries beneath the starlit sky.